Hello, I'm going to share with you today my course reflection from what I learned from ND 400. I'm going to begin with an overview of the learning process to share my likes and dislikes from the course. What I liked. I liked having word limits for the discussion posts because it challenged me to write concisely, which is something that I think is very important when writing with an online audience. I also liked that we had dual posts on what I like to call theory and practice. It helped me to separate my thinking in first writing about the theoretical or simply the skills in which we covered, and writing about how we can help students learn those skills in a classroom today with the help of technology, and then also going out on our own instead of having tools provided for us to find which are the best tools out there that we can use in our classrooms to help students practice. What I learned. I learned that fruitful discussions are born from engaging, thoughtful replies. And what I mean by that is that in having the requirement of responding to two peers, it helped the ball get rolling for starting a conversation. However, for those of us in the class who went beyond the expectation and decided to do more than one reply per peer or continue the replies into a full-length conversation, I felt that is when I had the most engaging and thoughtful discussions surrounding educational technology. I also learned that posting on the social media accounts kept me accountable. And what I mean by that is having to post my tools to Dijo and Twitter each week not only kept me accountable as a student for myself, but kept me accountable for other educators because I felt the sense of responsibility that others were relying on me, something that I can't say that I've felt before. What I would improve in this course. I would suggest that replies to technology posts be made a requirement because I feel that for some of us in the class it may have been a loss if we had not taken the time to read every single one of the technology posts because they were filled with some great ideas, and later in this presentation you'll see that I pulled all of the different technologies that I think I will use in my future. I'm going to talk about two main takeaways that I had from this course of topics or subjects that I feel will really stick with me past this course. The first is the importance of a PLN. I decided to put this in here because when I first started this course, this was our very first subject, and I have to say I had never heard of a PLN before. As you'll see in the picture on the right, we had even touched upon some of the many different types of a PLN. Some of them could take the form of an Instagram account, a LinkedIn, a Tumblr, a Twitter, a YouTube account. The options are endless. And what I learned is that there are a lot of benefits that I didn't really think of before learning about a PLN that having a PLN has. And I think one of the best benefits is that it provides a place for me as an educator to reflect on my practice and to give myself a space to evaluate and change or alter what I'm doing so I can better help the students as the years go on. I think without a PLN, I'd be missing the opportunity to reflect for myself, but also share that reflection with others, because other educators may benefit from my reflection and how I'm doing in my classroom, and they can alter how they teach in their classroom. The second point I would say is my main takeaway is information and media literacy. When we talked about this topic, I was really excited to learn about what it meant to be digitally literate. As a prospective English teacher, it's very important to me to discuss literacy in terms of print literacy because I need to be cognizant of which students are struggling readers and how I, as their teacher, can help them improve their literacy skills. But I think as we have seen in the 21st century and through this course, that it's equally, if not more important, for students to be digitally literate as well. And I think that falls on my shoulders and makes me responsible in teaching them to not only be literate in the print world, but to also be literate in the digital world. And I think one of the findings that I had in completing my discussion post for that week is that the only way for students to become information and media literate is when they're completing meaningful projects or conducting realistic research. And what I mean by that is when I reflect on my own experience as a student. I think about the many projects and research I've had to complete, and the ones where the topics were simply to improve a skill, but not a topic that I was necessarily passionate about. I don't think I took away the same enjoyment or the same improvement in comparison to projects where I was very into the topic. And an example of that would be my recent work on Edith Wharton, the author, who is my absolute favorite author, and having the opportunity to research her life and her work and write 30 to 50 page papers on her. Instead of being a bore and a challenge, it actually felt like a complete breeze and an enjoyable experience. And technology-wise, what I took away is that when I had a topic like Edith Wharton that I was very into, I was able to learn which databases were most helpful, which keywords would help me find the articles that I was looking for to fill in the gaps that I was missing in my paper, and so on and so forth. Now for future directions. As I said earlier, the future directions for me as a prospective teacher is that I had never learned about educational technology before. And so my goal going into this course was to curate a toolbox of different educational technology tools that I could implement in my classroom one day. And so what I decided to do is pick one tool from each of the sections that we had discussed in this course and talk about why and how I think I may implement that in my classroom. And so I'm going to begin with Wikispaces for our collaboration unit. And I picked Wikispaces because as a student myself, Wikipedia was shunned as a tool for us to use. It was considered not credible. It was considered poor writing if you were to use that in your writing, and yet I still find myself even to this day going to Wikipedia before anything if I'm unfamiliar on a topic and I just need to get my footing in what I understand. And so I don't understand why Wikispaces and wikis in general are underutilized in the classroom, because they really give students an opportunity to, instead of going to Wikipedia and perhaps using a non-credible source, to make a source for themselves that they know are credible by working with other students in the class to create something of use for themselves but also for others. And so in an English classroom, for example, why not create a wiki on a chapter of a book to help students in their class and other students around the world better understand it, as opposed to simply going to a SparkNotes or a CliffsNotes. The second tool I want to talk about is Remind from our communication unit. I had never heard of Remind before, and for me this tool was the one tool that I had wished existed before going into this course but didn't know existed until it was taught to me. I think that it would save a lot of time on my hands from emailing 20 some odd students' parents about their progress and how they're doing, what they can do to improve, or what they're doing well, and give me an opportunity to simply send a message in a way that is private and respectable for both parties, to simply give out reminders because we know we all need them, whether that's for the students to talk about an upcoming quiz, or to remember to bring in something for a field trip, or for parents to just give them a quick heads up so they're in the loop just as much as the students are. I think this is a great tool to improve school communication. The third tool I want to talk about is Who's Reading, which is the tool that I chose to focus on for the critical thinking unit. What I like about Who's Reading, even though it's a paid tool, is that it really encourages critical thinking in the subject area that I'm going into, which is English. It gives students Common Core aligned comprehension questions that encourages them to think, but also incentivizes them to do so by essentially making a social media-esque platform using avatars and coins and badges as incentives for them to keep reading. The fourth tool I want to talk about is Newsela, which was from our information and media literacy unit. I had never heard of Newsela, and for me, of all the tools I'm going to talk about, this is the one that I think I was most excited to learn about. In another life, if I wasn't going to become an English teacher, I would have loved to have become a journalist. And it's my life dream for a school to hire me someday as a journalism teacher and an English teacher. I'm very committed as an educator to not only teach students about English, but to teach them about the news that's going on in the world today, because I think it's very important for them to have exposure to realistic writing and not simply just fiction writing. And what I like about Newsela is that it's the perfect tool, especially in our English class, for differentiation. So everyone could talk about the same topic, but depending on the level of reader that you are, you can differentiate for the students, and essentially no one has to know that there's even differentiating going on except for the student. The fifth tool from assessment that I want to talk about is NoReading, which I completed my professional development project on, and I want to highlight that as my assessment tool because even though there are other great assessment tools that we learned about, like Polls Everywhere and SurveyMonkey, for example, I know that in my classroom, I wanted an assessment tool that would specifically target grammar and writing skills for students, because I feel that as an educator, my worry is to not strike the proper balance between helping students with their overall content and organization and ideas of their writing with their simple mechanics and technical skills. And so NoReading for me is that tool that would help me to assess the technical and the mechanics in a way that doesn't detract from the overall content and ideas that they're putting forth. And the final icon here is the YouTube icon to represent our last unit from digital citizenship, and I brought it up because Allison had brought up a really great YouTube series that essentially would ask students the question, what would you choose in this hypothetical scenario of a young girl who was asked to send a picture of herself and follow that question. And I pull that even though there are many other great tools to teach digital citizenship, because for the age group that I'm looking to teach, which is middle and high school students, and the Snapchat obsession and obsession simply with social media, which I think is increasingly getting more prominent as the years go on, I think it's important to have simple reminders like this in the classroom, because it's a very easy analogy to the academic world. If students are worried about their digital footprint in their personal life and what can be traced to them, that's a great way for them to learn about how to be conscious of their digital footprint in their academic life, and knowing that anything that they put online within the space of a classroom or outside the classroom that's academic or intellectual in nature is still tied to them, and they need to learn to be proud and able to stand by what they're saying because they are accountable for it. And so that brings me to wrap up in my reflection of how does this all tie into what my perfect tech classroom would look like. And the first thing would be that I would want every student to have access to a device. And I feel that's important because just as we discussed this past week with Ribble's 9 elements of digital citizenship, access topped the list, because without access and without fair access for all students to some sort of device, all of the other elements simply don't matter yet. We have to have every student have access to a device, and if that's not possible through a school's budget, I think the Bring Your Own Device initiative is something that we can, welcome instead of, hinder in a classroom, so that we can use all of these wonderful educational technology tools that are out there. And if I think about, what would a visitor see in my classroom and what would I have in my classroom, I would have all of my favorite tools that I just discussed. And I say that because I don't want to get overwhelmed too quickly with what I would have in my classroom. And those 6 are plenty for me to get started. And depending on the class, I can use whatever tool that I feel necessary. I don't have to use NoReading if I don't think that they're struggling with their grammar or technical writing. But if I want to introduce Newsela right away as a way for students to be exposed to informational writing, I can choose from the tools that I have and kind of gradually implement them over the years. And that way I could always change out tools as new tools are unveiled and have it be a constantly, updated classroom. But to begin, I want to be equipped with all of my favorite tools. And that would essentially tie into my overall vision for my classroom, which is to have a learning environment that's driven by collaboration and meaningful research projects. And I touched upon the meaningful research projects earlier, but the collaboration is from our very first unit, and I'm very excited by an environment that's driven by collaboration, because just as we in this course essentially contributed to a large collaborative discussion in the form of little mini discussions on topics, I want my students to be able to learn from each other in the same way. I learned more from my peers in this sense than I did from an instructor, which would be the more traditional model. And I want students to be able to have the same experience I had in a classroom setting, where they're collaborating with each other and learning from them rather than simply relying on me. And so if I have to ask myself what are the obstacles, the number one question that comes to my mind is, can I release control? And I mean that in the sense of, can I release control in letting go of the traditional classroom model and give over some of that control to the students, and even some of that control to educational technology, and having that be a primary part of my classroom. And I think one way for me to overcome that obstacle is to really just trust in a student-driven classroom to build accountability. I highlight student-driven because I want to reconceive myself as an educator that is really more of a facilitator rather than an instructor. And educational technology helps students and educators come to more of a even playing field in which everyone's learning from each other, and it's not so much of a hierarchical learning process. And I say that I want them to build accountability because just as I learned to be accountable for myself and for my fellow peers in this class, I want them to learn in our classroom that whatever they produce, whether it's digital or in writing, it's always important to know that you're accountable not only for yourself but for others, because it's important to want to share your work so others can learn from it. And so in an educational technology classroom where we're going to be publishing things online constantly, I want them to learn to be responsible, to put their work out there so others can learn from it. And that's my course reflection for MD 400. Thank you, Dr. Elliott, for a great 4 weeks.